How are you doing it now?
You good? Okay. We're going to be looking at John chapter 4, verses 43 through 54. A story commonly stated is the healing of the nobleman's son. To use it more contemporary language, we would say the healing of a dignitary's son, the healing of a high-ranking politician's son, or maybe even the healing of a very rich man's son. Because crucial to the story is the geography of the story. And also crucial to the story are the people, of course, in it. As I've said before, our study in the Gospel of John is not so much looking at the teachings of Jesus per se, like the Sermon on the Mount, or his teachings about prayer. Our angle on the story this morning and all of these stories are going to be looking at these people's struggle to believe something about Jesus. What he did, what he said, claims he made about himself. Why am I looking at it that way? Because you don't really need another teaching from me about the Sermon on the Mount. Okay? You don't need that. Where our paths intersect the paths of these people is when we find ourselves in a crisis and we're struggling to believe what God has said. We are all thoroughly saved. I have no doubt that there's a lot of people that know this book a lot better than I do. However, our common touch point, our common reference point with the people in the Gospels is the struggle that it is to believe. Or to put it more precisely, I'll call it the struggle to trust. You don't struggle to believe Joe Biden is President of the United States. However, you may struggle to trust his capacity to do anything there. Okay? Most of us don't struggle to believe that Jesus was God incarnate. Our struggle to believe, so to speak, is in what Jesus might be doing in our day-to-day life. And so that's going to be our angle to look at that this morning. So, with that said, let's read the passage. In verse 43, at the end of 2 days, Jesus went on to Galilee. He himself had said that a prophet is not honored in his own hometown. Yet the Galileans welcomed him, for they had been in Jerusalem at the Passover celebration and had seen everything he did there. As he traveled through Galilee, he came to Cana, where he had turned the water into wine. There was a government official in nearby Capernaum whose son was very sick. When he heard that Jesus had come from Judea to Galilee, he went and begged Jesus to come to Capernaum to heal his son who was about to die. Jesus asked, "Will you never believe in me unless you see miraculous signs and wonders?" The official pleaded, "Lord, please come now before my little boy dies." Then Jesus told him, "Go back home, your son will live." And the man believed what Jesus said and started home. While the man was on his way, some of his servants met him with the news that his son was alive and well. He asked them when the boy had begun to get better, and they replied, "Yesterday afternoon at 1 o'clock, his fever suddenly disappeared." Then the father realized that this was the very time Jesus had told him, "Your son will live." And he and his entire household believed in Jesus. This was the second miraculous sign Jesus did in Galilee after coming from Judea. One of the interesting things about John is compared to the other three Gospels that exist, John uses the word signs where we would use the word miracle. What's the difference in those two words? What's the difference between God giving you a sign and God doing a miracle in your life?
Confirmation.
A sign would point you.
A sign would point to something, okay?
Confirmation.
A miracle is a miraculous action, an event that a human could not duplicate ordinarily. Would you agree with that? So John said at his last verse, he doesn't say this is the second miracle that Jesus did. He said this is the second sign, okay?
Jimmy, signs were for the Jews to point to the Messiah, and I think that that's what he's referring to.
Well, it is that. The signs are for the world. But yes, the Jews,
Specifically the Jews.
yeah, they're for
That's
the
how-
Messiah. But John tells us at the end that I've written these so that anybody can believe that Jesus is the Son of God.
Right.
So yes, on a limited text, signs accompany the advent of the Messiah. But basically, for Gentiles, for all of us, and we see it throughout John's Gospel, whether you're a Jew or Gentile, Jesus is trying to convince people he's God in the flesh. Anyway, so that's what John says, that it's not so much the miracle that's important, it's what the miracle points to. The problem, though, we're going to see is this. People see miracles that Jesus does, for instance, the feeding of the 5,000. And when people follow him after that, Jesus gets a little exasperated because he said, the only reason you're following me is because you ate the bread and was filled. Okay? Why would Jesus be exasperated with them over that?
Because that's all they got.
He's basically saying, you don't understand the sign. You got a miracle, but you didn't understand the sign. Okay? So, the reason all this is important is because of what Jesus is saying here. But before I get into that, let's make sure we have the geography straight. When we were looking at the woman at the well, that was in a village called Sychar in the middle of Samaria. If you keep going north from Sychar, you get into Galilee. And if you come to Cana. And if you remember, Cana is where Jesus did the water into the wine. John says that was one of the first miracles Jesus did. That's about a 35-mile walk. So Jesus has hiked 35 miles. He's come up into Cana. But now there's another city listed here, Capernaum. Where is Capernaum? If you look at a map of Galilee and you locate the Sea of Galilee, to the west of it is Capernaum. To the northeast is Cana. To the northeast of Cana is Capernaum on the north shore. Here's the key thing you need to remember when I'm talking about this story. That's about a 15-mile walk. So, let's put that in the travel situations of their day, which is they travel on foot. You can travel 15 miles if you walk at a 3-mile-an-hour pace, which is a good fast walk. I know this because I have a treadmill. You can cover that in about 5 hours. However, let's say you're a political dignitary. How do you travel?
Not on your feet. Not on your feet.
You travel in a limousine.
Yeah.
Or in those days, you travel in a chariot pulled by horses. A horse can comfortably trot at about 5 miles an hour all day long. Okay? No big deal. So now what is our time frame? This man who is in Cana pleading for the life of his child could get back to his hometown where the child is probably in about 3 hours. That's a critical fact to remember here. The reason that's going to matter is because of the way Jesus works this out. So, in John, in verse 46, he brings it to our attention again. Jesus traveled through Galilee and came to Cana where he turned water into wine. There was a government official in Capernaum whose son, and that man had made that 3-hour trip down there. Why? He heard Jesus was there. Jesus had done a miracle there in the past. So like any parent would do, the man said, I'm going to go to where the miracle worker is, and I'm going to ask him to heal my child. And so that is what he does. However, we need to talk about 2 more aspects before we go forward. Up in verse 44, Jesus, it says, he himself had said that a prophet is not honored in his own hometown. Where is Jesus' hometown? Nazareth. Where is Nazareth? It's in Galilee. Here's the thing that's confusing to commentators. Jesus is saying, I'm not honored in my hometown, but yet the story says he's going there deliberately. What's going on there? The same thing that goes on all through the Gospels. Some people believe, some people don't. Some people believe, some people don't. So John is giving you a clue to two things here. Jesus had done a miracle where he turned water into wine in quote unquote his hometown. But that did not convince everybody. Make sense? Okay? So Jesus, by his own statement, is saying, I know I'm not going to be welcomed there, so to speak, by everyone, but I'm going there anyway. So he goes there.
Well, they've actually watched this little guy grow up from birth to childhood to a young adulthood, and he's been a boy. I mean, he's been, for the most practical part, he's just been a boy in the neighborhood.
That's right, just another typical boy.
Right,
And even we know from reading other texts that his own brothers didn't believe in him, right?
right.
So there's this mixed reception here. Jesus, though, is highlighting the negative reception, the ones who don't believe, okay? So the official heard that Jesus had come from Judea to Galilee. He went and begged Jesus to come to Capernaum to heal his son who was about to die. So the man shows up. He starts begging Jesus to come to Capernaum and heal his son. Jesus makes, to me, kind of a very abrupt, almost harsh response. Will you never believe unless you see miraculous signs? Think about that. Isn't that kind of harsh? Most of us would feel sorry for a parent begging for the life of their child. Jesus puts his hands on his hip and says, will you never believe unless you see something else? Why would Jesus say that to that man?
This is true.
It's true? Okay. It's true? Why else?
He's just throwing it right back at him.
He's just throwing it right back at him?
Wouldn't believe anyway unless you saw me do it.
What he's doing is that he's challenging this man at his point of crisis. When we looked at the woman at the well, what was Jesus' challenging statement to her? Go bring your husband. Okay? How is this a challenge to this man? Here is the clue. This man is thinking Jesus has to go there to do the job. He says in verse 7, he begged Jesus not to heal his son, but to come to Capernaum to heal his son. Jesus basically gives him a little bit of a slap in the face. And then the official pleaded again, please come now before my son dies. What was Jesus looking for from the man?
Blind faith.
Jesus was looking for confirmation.
He wanted the man to confirm his faith.
Okay, right?
Testing his faith. Testing his faith.
Testing his faith, but how exactly was it? Because the man believes Jesus can do miracles. Otherwise, he wouldn't have showed up.
He just didn't believe he could do it from there.
He just didn't
Yeah.
believe he could do it from there. That was the new wrinkle. Jesus was at the wedding when he turned the water into wine. He wasn't 25 miles away.
We have just the opposite layer. You know, when the centurion comes to me, he says, "No, Lord, you don't have to come. All you have to do is say it." Respecting the authority, I guess, is never mind.
No, you don't no, that is an excellent comparison, Martin. That's an excellent comparison. Because the Roman centurion, who, by the way, was not a well-informed Pharisee, who did not have this wealth of biblical knowledge, right? That Roman centurion said, you don't even have to show up. You just say the word. Okay? And in fact, the Roman centurion took it a step further when he said, I'm not even worthy for you to come here. Not only did that Roman centurion say, you can heal at a distance, he would say, I don't even deserve to have you do this. Yes?
What's the, paraphrase the verse that you're blessed if you believe without sin.
Mhm.
That's a more of a blessing to believe without, to have faith without
Jesus
sin.
told Thomas after he said, I won't believe unless I see the nail scars. He said, blessed are those who believe without seeing.
Right, I'm just,
Yeah. Yeah.
it's in there somewhere.
So what we see here with this man is that he is operating under the assumption that unless Jesus is present, he can't get the job done. And that's why Jesus says, you just won't believe. Here's the deal. Jesus did not pat him on the back by saying, you know, obviously you believe in me. You made this 15-mile trip. Jesus didn't give him a pat on the back. He just set the bar higher. And that's what he does to us. We seem to think that if we just get to first base, then we've gotten all the way around the home plate. We get to first base and Jesus says, that's great. Can you get to second? And that's where we go. Because that man, when Jesus basically rebuked him, it went in one ear and out the other. He pleaded again, come now. The man didn't get it. The man did not get it. Whereas the Roman centurion that Rodney talked about, he did not need a rebuke. He did not need a warning. He did not need a challenge. He just said, Jesus, you say the word, and there will be light.
And he got praised for it.
He
Not
said,
seen
greater faith, where?
He had
In
not.
all of Israel.
Yeah, he had not.
In all of
seen-
Israel. In other words, Jesus looking at the Roman centurion, he's looking at his own people who should have had the most faith. And he says this Roman Gentile has figured it out. So, Jesus finally makes it very clear what he's expecting. Go back home, your son will live, and the man believed what Jesus said and started home. Okay?
Isn't that a pretty big step of faith that the man, as soon as Jesus said it was okay, he just turned around and started back home? That he believed that what Jesus said was true, which unfortunately a lot of us don't, you know.
Right. No, you're right. The man, to his credit, said, okay, I get it. I'll do this. Okay? But there's still something else we need to see here, is that this, to really get into the details of the story, this man now had a challenge. He could have said, no, I'm not leaving here, Jesus, unless you come with me. Right?
Right.
He could have said that. Right? But to his credit, he chose to accept it, and your text says he went back home. That's not completely accurate, and here's how I'm going to show that to you, is by the time frame of the story. If he went back home, he could have been home in 3 hours. Right? I would say a more accurate nuance to Jesus' statement is this: go about your business, your son will live. Let's keep reading. While the man was on his way home, some of his servants met him with the news that his son was alive and well. He asked them when the boy had begun to get better. And they replied, yesterday at 1 o'clock, his fever suddenly disappeared. Do any of the translations you're using have a different way of stating that as far as the time frame? All your translations say 1 o'clock. Go ahead. 7th hour? Okay. Okay. The problem with this is this. John has a different way of keeping time than the other gospel writers. The Romans measured time from 6 a.m. in the morning was the start of the day. Okay? You remember in the creation account, what does it say? There was evening and morning the first day. Some Jews measured their day starting when the sun went down, not when the sun came up, basically. But the reason I'm laboring this point is this. While the texts say he was on his way home, keep reading. Because he asked them when the boy was going to get better. They say yesterday. So what's going on here? The miracle happened yesterday, okay? They're having a conversation with the servants today, but the man is not even at home yet. Because it says the servants met him on the way. I submit to you that here's what happened. When Jesus said, your son's going to get better, he will live. If it was me, I would have saddled up my chariot, whipped the horses, gone home as quick as I could to see him. And I could have been home in 3 hours, maybe sooner. This man, no matter how you measure the clock, is still not home 24 hours later because it said yesterday. What did the man do?
Probably went about his business then.
He went about his business. Not only did he say, okay, Jesus, I believe you can do it at a distance, but I'm still going to run home to see you. Okay? He said he went on about his, whatever he did something else. Okay? So here's the beauty of the story. This man whose faith started out being rebuked by Jesus goes to the other extreme and says, you know what? I'll go do my shopping at Walmart. I'll go down and get my driver's license renewed. Maybe I'll stop by the grocery store. Then I'll head for home and see if my kid who's almost dead is even alive. Think about that. Is that not great faith? Then the father realized that this was the very time Jesus told him, your son will live. Here is the application for us. I don't know about you, but I have what's known as spiritual amnesia. Not only can I not remember what I put my car keys nowadays, I can also forget what God has done in the past. It's a very deadly human condition. It's first manifested with the Israelites after they crossed the Red Sea. Okay? And in Deuteronomy, before they go into the Promised Land, when you read Moses' speech, he keeps trying to get these people to remember what God has
I think
done.
there's like 4 or 5 chapters at the end where it says, remember, think on these things, reminisce, all these words to bring them back to remember.
Back to remember, okay? Here is the deal, is God does something, you're in some kind of crisis, okay? And God does something to get you through it. But what happens 3 months later when another crisis hits?
You forget to ask him for help.
You tend to forget what he has done. The power of this man's faith is this. It's that he was willing to actually act on what Jesus said, not just give mental assent to it. In other words, he was willing to act on it by staying where he was and not immediately getting in his chariot and taking off from him. He acted on his faith. He did not just give mental assent to what Jesus said. That is the difference. You may remember when we were in the other room, and I was going through talking about prayers in the Bible. We looked at Abraham, okay? And one of the things we saw is this. We saw this struggle. And I can summarize the struggle this way. Abraham's prayers indicated doubt, but his actions indicated faith. His prayers indicated the struggle to believe. His actions indicated that he had chosen to believe. Whatever struggle this man had to believe, and it's obvious even from what we see that he did have a struggle. He actually chose to act out his belief by not running from home. And so it is with us. We know, like the man, we have enough information to believe, but we struggle to act out our belief. So, he says he was still traveling, and it said the slaves met him, and the father realized this was the time Jesus told him, your son will live. What else happened from there?
The
His whole household believed. Do you remember the woman at the well? Let's do some comparisons, kind of like what Rodney did with the Roman centurion. Let's compare this story with the woman at the well. What miracles did that woman see?
None.
Like you saw anything.
She didn't see it.
I don't think she saw any miracles.
Well, he knew. He
She-
knew without ever
Yeah, he knew
meeting her.
things.
He knew about her life.
No, but what did she say?
That she saw that he knew about her
She
life.
saw that he had prophetic insight
Yes.
when she talked about her past.
Must be a prophet.
But here's my point. Jesus didn't fix anything. Jesus didn't say, go call the woman, da-da-da-da-da. And by the way, I'm going to give you a brand new husband. I'm going to give you the husband you've always wanted but never had. Those 5 husbands that didn't stay and kicked you to the curb, I'm going to give you a new one, and he's going to live with you the rest of your life. Jesus did not fix anything. He did not improve her life. He didn't even say, look, because you believe about spiritual water, you're never going to have to come to this physical well again. He didn't improve anything. What did she do? She marches off into town
Yeah.
and tells everybody, could this be the Messiah? Okay. That's what she did. What makes her impressive to me is just that. I want Jesus to improve my life.
Well, what was impressed by the woman as well, when she went back to town, with her reputation, the townspeople actually believed her.
Yes, the most uncredible witness
Right.
in the courtroom is now become the credible witness. Okay? But what else happened in that story?
Whole town.
The whole town came out, and then when you read the story, the people say, it's not just because of what you said, we have seen and heard for ourselves. There is no miracle in that story, but yet I submit to you that town had a revival. Would you agree? But there was no miracle done. Okay? We get here to this guy, and Jesus says, unless you see miracles, you just won't believe. How many of you, if you were raising teenagers, and you're trying to get some kind of point across to them, and you think, if I don't slap you upside the head, you're just not going to get it.
Yeah?
Have we all not been there? Okay. Jesus is basically telling that man, unless I do something, you're just not going to get it. Jesus could have very well said, look, let me tell you about the town whore and where I just came from. Because you're royalty. You're special. Okay? You're the upper echelon of society. But when I went to the dregs of society and I didn't heal anybody, she believed me.
Right.
Jesus said at the beginning of the story, or John records it, he said, no prophet is welcome in his hometown. Jesus is very aware of my obstinacy. He's very aware of my refusal to believe. He's very aware when I forget what he did 3 months ago. Okay? However, Jesus is still going to challenge me just like he challenged this guy. Okay? He's going to challenge me just like he challenged the woman. What do I mean by that? He challenged her character, did he not? He challenged this man's faith, did he not? And so here it is. The battle that all of us have to believe will come in two flavors. One is there'll be a circumstantial crisis. The other one, there'll be a character crisis. But if I'm going to learn from these people in the activity of Jesus in their life, I have to accept that. I have to look at my life and I have to say, Jimmy, the normal Christian life is going to consist of two types of struggles to believe. One type of struggle to believe will be when your character will be challenged. Patience, courage, forgiveness, all those intangible things that make up our character. The other thing that Jesus is going to challenge me on is circumstances. I'm out of money. My car blows up 1,000 miles from home. Any of these things that I would call physical struggles in life. If Jesus operated that way to these people then, I'm a wise man if I understand he will operate in those ways to me now. If I'm going to be a wise man, I will see myself struggling to believe the way these people struggle to believe. Were you going to say something? Okay.
I was just trying to really process what you were saying. I was trying
So, the thing is, belief is hard. Because really it's not belief, it's trust. Trust is hard. But what we see with this man's household is what we saw with the Samaritan village. The village came out and believed on the testimony of the woman. They didn't even have these personal conversations with Jesus. This man's household believed on the testimony of the man. Here is the fundamental question that I have to ask myself when I look in the mirror every day. Jimmy, what will it take to compel you to trust in Jesus today? What will it take to compel you, to convince you to trust Jesus today?
Just the fact that you woke up.
That's always a good start.
I think we struggle with, like, being worthy of his, of what, because, that guy pulled out in front of me yesterday, and what I thought about him, and the neighbor, and the AR, I think that's where I struggle is, being worthy. I know I'm forgiven, and I believe everything in this book, but, I did that yesterday, why would he bless me? Why should I get a blessing when I'm not in the top, where I should be with him?
Right.
Well, it's just like when Jesus was walking on water, we asked Peter to come out, and then it turned out he of little faith. We just need to be reminded almost on a daily basis.
Moment by moment, we need to be reminded. That's why we need to remember what he has done. And, it's for those people that journal and write down these things that the Lord does. I think that's wonderful, because then you can go back and you can look and be reminded. But you can also pray and say, Lord, help me remember the things that you've done. And he will bring it to mind. And then you say, okay, that power that you did there, will you please demonstrate it in my life now?
Let's go back to what you said. You said this, I don't feel worthy. Okay? You don't have to feel worthy. You just have to be trustworthy. Right. Tell me something. How was that Samaritan poor worthy?
She wasn't.
How was that Roman centurion worthy?
He wasn't.
He was
That still don't mean he didn't feel it.
But the problem is this, I can either walk by emotions or walk by faith.
I agree.
And so the deal is, It's not how worthy you are, it's how much faith you have.
Right.
Jesus never goes to anybody and says, you know what, I'd like to do a lot more in your life, you know.
You used
I
up
just
all your
can't do it
chances.
because you're not quite good enough. Instead, he goes to some of these towns, he said, you know, if this town would have seen the miracles I've shown you, they would have repented.
Right.
He never rebukes people for their credibility or their lack of credibility. He rebukes them for their lack of faith. That's the comfort.
Yes. Amen.
That is the comfort. He does not rebuke them for their lack of credibility or their lack of character. Okay?
Right.
He rebukes them for their lack of faith.
Right.
When he talks to that woman at the well, the first thing he says is this: clean up your act and we'll talk. He doesn't say that. He says, if you would know who's talking to you and the gift of God, you would ask him and he would give it. Think about that.
Amen.
He's going to this whore and he said, if you knew who I was, you would know that I have a gift for you, and you would ask for that gift and I would give it. It's like a homeless man coming up, and I don't know that he's really Warren Buffett in disguise and he's worth $70 billion. And he said, well, Jimmy, if you knew who I was, you'd ask me for $1 million and it'd be here. Nothing is said about her character, her credibility. Jesus opens up his conversations with this in a crisis. I have something to give you. I have something to give you. To me, that's awesome.
Amen.
That is awesome. Jesus opens up the crisis, steps into the crisis of my life. And he says, Jenny, if you knew who I was, you would ask me, and I have something to give you. Here is the problem. When I'm in a crisis, you know what I'm worried about? What I'm about to lose. I'm always worried about what I'm about to lose. I don't tend to go through life thinking, what could I have gained? And to me, it's a far better way to approach your daily life, thinking this. Jesus is standing there and he said, Jimmy, I have something to give you. But here's the problem. It's not what that Samaritan woman wanted him to give her. Obviously, Jesus does not always give us what we want. But Jesus says this: do you know enough about me to ask for what you really need? And that's the good news.
Amen.
Good
Good
news.
preach right there. It's good.
Don't we, and all of us have problems with trust and faith. We may trust in God, trust in Jesus, but sometimes it's hard to keep the faith in what he's saying and how it will affect us. And we have a tendency to say, okay, I trust God, and I'm going to go ahead and do it my way.
Then you don't turn it over.
Yeah.
Or we turn it over on Monday and we take it back on Tuesday.
Get it still.
Different day.
You had 24 hours to take care of this. Why didn't you do that?
I call it spiritual schizophrenia. I'm a man of dual personalities. That's the problem. We want trust to be a once for all thing, not a daily thing. So, let me ask you a question. Do you believe God is working even when he doesn't use the process you assume he must use to fix your problem?
Absolutely.
Yes.
In good
His
time.
timing and our timing are not the same.
That's right.
His timing, right? But that was this man's fundamental thing when he approached Jesus. He had a request, but in his mind, if Jesus is going to answer my prayer, he's got to do it this way. I submit to you that Jesus is never in the habit of duplicating his actions in my life. Just because he fixed this financial problem this way 3 years ago doesn't mean he will fix the same problem this way today. And that was this man's fundamental limiting of his faith that Jesus had to open up. He was convinced Jesus could heal. Otherwise he wouldn't have showed up and kept bleeding. His problem was he assumed this is the way God works. You are much like me. Most of you have been Christians for a long time. Although we don't say that, we slip into this habit of thinking, oh, this is the way God works. I know this. I've been through that. I've seen this before. This is the way it's supposed to happen. Right? And so the challenge to our faith is not so much that we don't believe God can do it. We believe he has to do it a certain way.
Our way.
Our way.
Has the prayer thing gone through?
Didn't this go around all the way? In the back and all? Did you okay? Didn't you press it back? It's hard to think of. I started here, so.
What I found is, if ever, probably never, he's ever answered a prayer like I prayed. Because it's always been something I would have never thought of. It's always better than what I prayed, or different than what I prayed, because it was, he gave me what I needed, not what I deserved.
Right.
That's true.
And sometimes he answers it in, oh, if I would have done it this way, this would have happened. Wow, he did it this way,
Right.
so this happened.
Yeah.
And what we also forget is that, like the whole household believes because of it, when we go through trials, God's not just working in our lives, he's working in others around us.
Amen.
And sometimes we have to go through those trials, and it can be really bad because of what needs to happen to others around us. So we could just be that vessel that needs, you know, and he's working in our life too, but to work in other people's lives.
Right. Yeah. One of the things I realized, I think it was back in my 30s, that a family can go through the same situation as a family, but God can have different lessons for different people in the family to come up with. You know? But here is one of the things that I've realized about myself that I've struggled with. Well, this is what God's trying to teach you. That's what families tend to do to each other. Families have great skill about telling one another what God is teaching them.
And they need to obey their elderly, obey the elderly ones too.
Divorce court's full of them.
We ain't finished the wall, buddy.
And the thing is that God chose that little boy to get sick so that his dad would have faith to go see Jesus, so that his faith could get stronger, because Jesus said, you just go home and it'll happen. And then a whole family got saved because one boy was made sick.
And the men on the road that met him on the road,
Yeah.
they saw it.
The servant, yeah.
Like you said, it just keeps going.
Keeps working its way out.
Yeah.
One of the things, when you talk about God working in different ways over different times, you know, and how, like I said, we tend to assume he's going to keep doing the same types of things the same way. When you look at the Israelites, and you remember the idea of you remember the manna feeding them? When Moses is looking back over that with them, after it's in the past, he repeatedly uses the phrase, God fed you with manna that you did not know, nor your fathers. In other words, he's trying to emphasize to them that it was something they would have never imagined. And not only that, to put it in more physical terms, their ancestors never experienced. Okay? What do I mean by that? I am my children's ancestor, am I not? God may do something different in my kids' lives that he's never done in mine. And sometimes that's joyous, but sometimes it hurts. Sometimes it's a challenge to them, just like it was a challenge to those Israelites with the manna. All that is wrapped up in this idea of this is the way God works. We have to realize he's going to work in different ways in our life. And we have to realize that he's going to work in different ways in our children's life. And each of those ideas present their own struggles. David?
What I see in the story is that the man obviously knew about Jesus, but just didn't have to believe. And once he was able to go talk to Jesus and then go back and see what had happened, like you said, himself, but then the whole family saw and they did believe. Obviously, they had knowledge about Jesus. There's a lot of people in our world today that has knowledge, but they don't have to believe.
That's what I was thinking about my kids. I mean, they even say things that make you know they realize it and even partially believe. They'll even say, hey, Mom, say a prayer. We need, I'm just like, will you come do it with me?
If you had asked this man, he probably said, I have enough belief because I'm here asking for the miracle. In other words, this man, in his own way, was satisfied with the faith that he had.
Mm-hmm.
He did not know he had a problem until Jesus gave him that little slap in the face. Like him, today, if I were to ask you, on a scale of 1 to 10, how satisfied with you or the faith that you have? You'd say, oh, Jimmy, it's a 10. I'm very satisfied with my faith. I don't know that my faith is insufficient until God challenges it. This man didn't either. And that's another illusion that we buy into. We gather in this room, we gather over in that building, we read this book, and on any given day, if I were to knock you on the door of your house, and I would say, I'm taking a religious survey. How satisfied are you with your faith? It's like asking, how satisfied with you with Joe Biden? How satisfied with your, oh, you would say, well, Jimmy, I'm pretty satisfied with it. Jesus is never satisfied with your faith. He always wants to take it a step higher. And we will see this all the way through this gospel. Jesus, if you think about it, the disciples had faith. They were following him around. They were even trying to obey him just like you. But what does Jesus do? He says, okay, let's get out, go in the boat, we'll go into a storm. We'll see how you're doing there. He never lets it rest. He never lets it rest. Why? Is he just like a gym teacher? Well, you did 10 push-ups yesterday, you got to do 15 today. Is it that? Why?
He's our Father in heaven.
Well, what does that matter?
To keep it up.
Okay, but still, think more precise. Okay, why should he ask me to do 15 push-ups today when I did 10 yesterday?
To strengthen your faith.
Why do I need a stronger faith?
What's coming down the road?
That's what I was thinking.
There is a future.
Yeah.
Why?
Preparation. In the disciples' place, they didn't know at the time, but he was fixing to send them out. A little OJT, and then after he was gone, it was up to them.
Well, it's up to us.
Yeah.
Aren't you that? If I were to ask you something, here's the irony of it is. Some of the hardest struggles you've ever been through, but looking back, you trusted God, makes you the happiest. Does it not? Some of the hardest struggles you've been through, if you can look back and you say, I stood strong, I trusted Him, it was a day-by-day battle, but I did this. Is that not some of the happiest times?
Yeah. Makes you stronger, too.
It makes you stronger,
Some of the biggest
but
struggles.
at a deeper level, what else does it do? That invisible God of the universe is just a little bit more real.
And every time you struggle with your faith, that happens. He becomes more
More
real,
real.
and your faith is stronger. And so when the bigger things come, you have more faith, and you can stand.
Yes. But I submit to you that yes, it would make you happy to win the lottery. Yes, it would make you happy to have all your physical ailments healed. It would make you happy if Jesus fixed everything. But one of the things that makes you the happiest is when you can look back in your life and you say, I trusted God to the max, and I did this. There's a saying that goes like this: that which is bitter to endure is sweet to remember. That which is bitter to endure is sweet to remember. When those disciples went out on that boat and the storm was swamping them. And Jesus said, be of good courage, I am. Okay? You know what? Those disciples probably never forgot that night. I wouldn't have forgotten that night. Okay?
And he would have said, do you remember Peter? He went out of the boat.
So, the irony of the Christian life is this: that which is bitter to endure can be very sweet to remember. One other thing, and then I'll close. Verse 50. The man believed what Jesus said and started home. Skip down. Verse 53, the last part. And he, as an entire household, believed in Jesus. Is John repeating himself here? Or is he trying to tell us there's a difference in these believings? Go ahead.
I believe he can heal.
Okay.
Oh, he's the Messiah and I trust him for my eternity.
Yes.
Those are the differences.
I think it's one thing to believe that God can do miracles. It's another thing that says, I believe God exists to me. This man started off, and you would have said, yes, I believe in miracles, otherwise I wouldn't be here asking for one. Okay? But the conclusion was, not only did he believe the event, he actually believed in the person. And so it is with us, is that God acts and works in our lives, and so we believe. But hopefully, like this man, the belief will go to a belief in the person. What do I mean by that? Jimmy, I'm already saved, I believe that. That's not the struggle. I know you believe that you're saved. I know you believe you're going to heaven. But when your son is about to die, do you believe that Jesus loves you? That's the struggle. Any more comments, questions? I'll pray us out here. Father, I just ask that tomorrow and Tuesday and all the other tomorrows and Tuesdays, that you would help us to remember what you've done in our past, because I know that all of us have some great stories. That you would help us to remember that, and that we would realize that the same Jesus who did that, ever how long ago it was, has not changed, and you are the same Jesus to us today. And I ask that you would help us to keep our eyes on the goal line, on the prize, and accept the fact that sometimes what is the bitterest to endure can be the sweetest to remember. I pray this in Jesus' name. Amen.
Thank you, Jim.